Hey everyone, let's kick off another round of Thomas Wooden Railway discussions by doing a re-review of sorts, because I have already looked at the Knapford Express coach. In fact, it was the very first Thomas Wooden Railway discussion that I uploaded to my channel in October of 2009, and that video at the time was just to serve as a compare-contrast video because this was a new version of the Knapford Express coach that I had recently gotten, and I wanted to compare it to the old version, or the first version that I had from when I was growing up as a child. So in a sense, I've already reviewed the Knapford Express coach, but that was 9 years ago, and since then I've acquired a couple more versions of the Knapford Express coach that I want to take a look at. So this is a re-review, but it's been 9 years since the original video, so I thought it would be appropriate to take a look and see how this very famous piece of rolling stock has changed over the years. So if we want to go back to the very beginning of the Knapford Express coach's origin story, we have to go back to around 1992 or 1993. The Knapford Express coach was one of the first, was part of the first wave of engines and rolling stock that was released when the Thomas Wooden Railway line was invented. And this is what the Knapford Express coach used to look like. It's very bare, it's very bland. In fact, the coach detailing that you're looking at right here doesn't even extend all the way to the end of the wood piece. It just sort of ends. And in fact, you have no idea that this is a Knapford Express coach because there's no writing on it. I mean, it just looks like a coach, or I guess to the uneducated eye, it kind of looks like a box or even a coffin. It has a very strange dark gray color that would later be replaced with a much lighter, I guess, warmer color, if that makes sense. But this very first version of the Knapford Express coach is very strange, to say the least. It has the thin wheels, which were common at the time. There's no dates on the bottom or anything like that, although we do have a nice bogie system here so that this coach can go around corners. But yeah, compared to what came later, this coach is just dull and kind of dark and not very interesting, honestly. However, it's highly sought after because it is the first version of the Knapford Express coach. I'm going to go through sort of the evolution of this piece of rolling stock, and you're going to notice that, or I'm going to tell you along the way, kind of, the rarity of each one and how hard it was for me to find. So, while I don't think this is the hardest version of the Knapford Express coach to find, it was definitely the most expensive one for me, and I ended up buying all of these off of eBay because that's really the only place you can find them on a global large scale. So this is the first version of the Knapford Express coach. It has the flat magnets, obviously, which, if you don't know, these were later changed to the rounder magnets that still exist because the connection here wasn't super strong. Maybe I'll showcase that later if I put a bunch of these coaches together. But anyway, that is the first version of the Knapford Express coach, and I'm going to put that about right there. The second version looks very similar to the one we just looked at. However, we finally have some identification on this piece of rolling stock. It says Knapford Express. And since the Express coach wasn't a Thomas Wooden Railway item at this time, I guess this is what Gordon would have pulled for the Express back then. Since it is a Knapford Express coach, it's not just like a Knapford regular coach or, generic coach that, I don't know, like Henry or James or Edward would pull. So it's very similar to the coach we just looked at. If I kind of put them side by side, we still have this buffer area where for some reason the design of the coach, in my opinion, that's supposed to be, the design there, doesn't go all the way to the end. I really don't know why that is. And looking at the coaches from this perspective, it's very clear to me that these are supposed to represent the red versions of the Express coaches that Gordon would pull. If you kind of forget about this gray area and you just focus on the colored area in the center, and you think of that as like the side of a coach that's running down the rails, hopefully you guys can see, if you know your, Thomas history, it looks very similar to that coach that has appeared in numerous seasons of the Thomas and Friends TV series. But as you can tell, it's very similar to the old coach. The windows are the same. really the only thing that's been added is we have some clarification as to what this coach is. So it still has the flat magnets, and I don't believe there is any writing. No. So really, there's not a whole lot of information out there about when these, coaches were released or their specific dates. We just know that this was the first one, so we can safely say it's from 1992, 1993. Some people say that this version is like a second version that was released in 1992, 1993, perhaps. My thinking is that since there wasn't any writing on here, nobody knew what it was. But since it has flat magnets, we can say this is from around, 1992, 1993. And so therefore, I'm just guessing, I want to say the run, or, the production run for these coaches is very, very small and limited in case, they were split about half and half. First run with this design, the second run with this design. So hopefully that makes sense. But we still have this very gray paint going on here. And I just don't know why they didn't just, extend the coach design to the edge, as we're going to see later. That's what they did. But anyway, that's the second version of the Knapford Express coach. Between all of the versions of the Knapford Express coach that I'm about to show you, these two are probably the most similar, because the only change is that this one doesn't have any writing and this one has writing. That's it. So there's the first version and there's the second version. Let's move on to the third version, which I showed off at the beginning of this video. So back in 2009, I had picked this off eBay for, I think in the original video I said like $27 or so. It still has flat magnets, which makes me believe it's from 1993. I think in that first video I called it 1994 because back then there wasn't a whole lot of information about these Thomas Wooden Railway items, but I think since then everybody's kind of realized, or somebody's found out some groundbreaking information, that this is from 1993. So if we say this is 1992 Part 1, 1992 Part 2, this is like the 1993 release. I think that's just how I'll say it. We finally have some roof details up here, which is really nice. It's much better than just this bland, boring version. And we finally, or I should say the coach design, like just the aesthetic layer here that's supposed to represent this red coach, has been widened a little bit. It now stretches more towards the end of the coach than the previous version, but it's still not all the way there for some reason. There was also this black border that went around the entire coach, especially around the area where it said Knapford Express. That is now gone, and instead we have like this red stripe or red label here instead that doesn't have a border, and also I think the font has changed. It's a little bit thinner. Oh no, it's actually thicker than the old version. It actually looks to be the same type of font, but on this version it's actually thicker than on the previous version. So at the time when I bought this back in 2009, I didn't know how many versions of the Knapford Express coach there was, but I knew this version was older than the version I previously had at the time, which I'll show off in just a little bit here. So, in my opinion, this is the third version of the Knapford Express coach. I think a lot of people would agree with me. The wheels are still thin compared to what will come later, and there is still no writing on the wheels, which makes it very hard to try to decipher when this coach was introduced. So there we go, we have the third version of the Knapford Express coach. Now let's move on to a very interesting version of this coach. Like I mentioned, this was the most expensive version of the coach for me to buy, whereas this version of the coach was the hardest for me to find. It was not necessarily the most expensive, however. This version of the Knapford Express coach just looks extremely different right away. And that's because apparently this version of the coach was only sold overseas, meaning it was not a United States release. According to the internet, it was released in Europe and maybe even Canada and Australia. But for some reason it was never released in the United States. And that makes a lot of sense because this was the last version of the coach that I acquired. I ended up buying this one pretty early on in the game, but it took me a long time to find this version of the Knapford Express coach. So this is sort of an in-betweener between this version and the version that'll come after. You'll see here in a sec. The red stripe or the red label has actually increased in size. Part of the border is back. It looks like the coach now has like a line under it. And the windows have changed as well, whereas like there was a tiny window here, it's now much bigger and it's actually moved up to the top of the coach. The roof is also a little bit different. Specifically, this area right here on the old coach is much darker than the, I guess, the newer version of this coach. And the reason I say it's like the next version of the coach chronologically is because we don't have flat magnets anymore. If you look underneath, I don't know if it will focus. If you look at that back wheel there, maybe not. That says 1990, what does that say, 1993? Oh no. Oh wow, I just realized something. This is why you do your research before, you guys aren't going to believe that. This is why you do your research, and I felt like I did do a fair amount of research before this video. This will be extremely hard to see, but believe me. That says, so in the back, we're not looking at this front wheel here, we're looking at the writing on the back of this wheel or even this wheel. I'll try to do it. The writing on the back of this wheel, it's hard to see. I wish my camera would focus. Come on. That says 1996 in the back there. And it says so on this wheel right here. Let me... Yep, 1996. I'm not making this up. Yep, it says 1996. Trust me. Hopefully you guys can see it. I think I have the dates lined up. Actually, right there. So the dates on the wheels should be lined up right there. These wheels say 1996. If you go over here, you can hopefully see the very distinctive mark of a 4 on that wheel right there. I wish my camera would focus. I am so sorry. That is a 4, 1994, and it also says 1994 on this wheel as well. I'm sorry that it's really hard to see. You'd think with a camera of this quality it would be easier to zoom in on things. So I have never noticed that before. In fact, when I was preparing for this video, I just glanced at one of the bogies, and I think I glanced at the one that said 1994. So that is super interesting. I don't know why that is. These wheels say 1996. Let me flip it over and see. 1996 and 1994. Okay. So it's still the same. So this bogie, which was over here when we were looking at it, this bogie was 1996, was it? And this one was 1994. I've had this coach in my possession for a while now, and I've just never bothered to check the dates. So that is really, really interesting. I want to say, you know, when they were making this coach, if it wasn't a US release, it's very likely that it kind of got the leftovers of everything. So in a way, I mean, that's just my, you know, most probable answer to why the bogies have different dates, but I swear I have never noticed that until now. But anyway, the point I was making is that we no longer have a flat magnet on the front here. We have a round magnet, and there's a nice view as to how each would connect. So whereas the flat magnet, you have more surface area to connect to, I think just the design and sort of that pointed, you know, almost pointed end, more pointed than this end on the newer magnet, just provides for a stronger connection. Whereas on those ones back there, if you connect them together, they just literally break apart, where here there's actually a strong connection. So that was very exciting. I totally was not expecting that. But I guess I'll get back to my main point of, this was not released in the United States, and I actually had to buy this from somebody in the UK and had to have it shipped overseas in order to get here. Another thing I just noticed, with the red, where it says Knapford Express, there's a little bit of a gap here before the bottom of the coach on this side, but then on this side it kind of runs flush over here, and it's kind of been put on a little bit crooked because it starts to come up over there. So, like I said, this version of the coach, the first version was the most expensive for me to buy, but this one was the hardest to find because it wasn't sold in the United States, and I just think the run production on this version is pretty low. So this is like the fourth version of the Knapford Express coach. I really don't know the date of it. It's at least it's between 1994 and 1996. Let's just say that. So that's the fourth version, or like the international version of the Knapford Express coach. And then here comes the final version, which is by far the most, I'd say, popular and mass-produced. This version was around for a number of years. The Knapford Express coach was sold between like 1992 and 1998, I want to say. And so this design was sold from about 1994, 1995 through the end. So this version is by far the most common. As you can see, I talked about how this coach was sort of a transition between these past three, which hopefully, that makes sense. Whereas, we went from a darker shade of gray paint to a lighter shade here, and the way that the Knapford Express writing has been made and all that. So hopefully, what I said back then still is true today, in that fourth version, the international version, is like a transition one. This is the only version of the Knapford Express coach where the writing is actually above that red stripe. All of the other versions that have writing, it's part of the red stripe, but for some reason here it's put above, which is totally fine. It's probably more realistic, whereas this kind of, I don't know, it looks like a sticker. It's like, boom, Knapford Express, whereas here it's like, oh, this is just a coach, and the red here is the design of the coach, and it just says Knapford Express versus, it looking somewhat like a sticker, in my opinion. So the roof, it's a little bit lighter. This is the international fourth version. This is the fifth version. It's a little bit lighter. And the windows look exactly the same. Remember, they changed design back there, but they look the same over here. And obviously the red stripe is much smaller than the previous version, and even here it's smaller. And of course I mentioned how the writing isn't on the stripe anymore. So this was the version of the Knapford Express coach that I had growing up as a kid. In fact, I'll show you my version of the coach that I had. It's the exact same. These are pretty common. If you're going to find one of these express coaches on eBay, you're probably going to find this one. I've seen versions of this coach with flat magnets though. So to me, it's really interesting. It's like 1992 Part 1 and 1992 Part 2. And then like 1993, and then like maybe 1994 through 1996, and then this was maybe like 1994 through 1996. So I really don't know. The good news is that this coach has dates on the bottom, but I was talking about how I had this coach from when I was a child, and I was always a big fan of, the thing that appealed to me, Thomas, the reason Thomas appealed to me as a kid, I'm trying to say, is that, I liked how everything had faces. And so when I was a kid, I took a marker and drew a face on the back. It's faded since then. And if I ever tried to resell this model, it probably wouldn't go for very much because I've vandalized it. But this is the version of the Knapford Express coach, the exact model that I had when I was a kid. And I know that because I drew a face on it. And it's a very happy coach, and I don't have an engine near me, but the face is positioned so that it sticks out backwards. So like the engine's facing this way and he pulls it along. It's not like the face is tucked up behind the engine, if that makes sense. So this version of the Knapford Express coach, I hope it has the same dates on both bogies. Hopefully you can see that on the back there. I think that says 1998. It does. It says 1998, and I guess I better just check the other bogie. Yep, it says 1998 as well. I'm really sorry. Hopefully you guys... It wants to keep focusing on this front wheel, and I'm like, no, I don't. Yeah, so that says 1998. I'm positive this one says 1998 as well. It's a little bit dirtier. And if you're wondering, yeah, it is 1998. If you're wondering why I have two versions of this coach, well, I got this version off of eBay like for a steal, like a while ago, like over a year ago, I want to say. So I didn't go out and buy a second version just to have it, or just because I have a face on this one. I just got it for a really good deal, so I bought it. So there you have it, folks. Those are the 5 versions of the Knapford Express coach that have gone through some pretty significant changes over the years. We've gone from a coach that for some reason they didn't bring the coach design all the way to the edges, whereas here, we're finally there. I think, that's about as close as you can get. The body, the main color of the wood was a lot darker. Now it's almost white, or, down here it's white. They changed the windows, they changed the red stripe, they've added the Knapford Express writing, they changed the wheels. These are now the thicker wheels, and if you've ever wondered what the difference between the wheels are, actually I'll do it like this. Hopefully you guys can see that these wheels are much thinner. They're probably more prone to breaking because they're thinner, but these are much thicker. So this coach, considering, it was sold for 6-7 years or so, but it went through a lot of manifestations in that very short period of time, especially early on. This version of the coach, the way it looks right now, was sold for a couple of years, which is big news considering back then. I'm thinking that, these two versions were sold in the same year. So we have a change within 1 year of each other. Then we have another change within a year of each other. Then we have this weird international version that is really hard to find, but really cool. And it stands out. And then we have, this one final version, but I have 2 versions of that coach. So we have 5 versions total. If I had a favorite to choose from, I don't really know. The older versions are cool because they're definitely old Thomas Wooden Railway items, but I think the version that looks the best is this version. The last one that they produced, and produced it on a much larger scale than the previous ones. I think the gray paint throws me off, so if I had to choose like a second favorite, it'd be this one. And then, compared at one point, the only 2 Knapford Express coaches that I had were these 2. And there's a definite difference between the 2. However, we like to look upon these old Thomas Wooden Railway models with a lot of, praise, but that's just really boring, there's not a lot to it. You can't even tell it's a Knapford Express coach, and of course, this is the era where there's no writing on the bottom. So, even though we like to glorify these types of models and say, oh, they look so good, well, this one, not really, because I don't know why they couldn't. I'm still, befuddled as to why they couldn't just expand this. This looks like just like a sticker that they slam on, or they've printed it on, or maybe even printed or painted it on back during that time. But the dark colored paint gray here just doesn't do it for me for some reason. I think the evolution that you see here is done in a really nice way, so that the final version of the Express coach that we got around 1997, 1998 is actually the best looking version of the coach. So I would love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments below as to which coach you think is the best. Just a quick overview, like I said, this is the most common version of the coach. This one's the hardest to find. This one's just kind of in the middle. You can find it, but it'll still be expensive. And then these 2 back here, since they're from the way early days of Thomas Wooden Railway, I'm totally stumbling over my words here. Since they're from the early days of Thomas Wooden Railway, they're hard to find and they're expensive. Like I said, I had to pay the most for this coach. But in a weird way, this one was the hardest one for me to find. So I recommend getting the Knapford Express coach. It's just a hard model to find at a reasonable price, I think. And you're just going to have to be looking on eBay if you want to find them, unless you get lucky at like a garage sale or something. So anyway, that's it for me. Thanks for watching this very long video. But I wanted to go into some, great detail here and compare and contrast all the different versions of the Knapford Express coach. And like I said earlier, I'd love to hear what your guys' favorite version of the coach is. I think that's it. So everybody, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next Thomas Wooden Railway discussion.